Good morning, people. And here's a neat little post on Screen Rant. Screen Rant is a hit and miss. You don't know who's going to say what and how. So this is one of the good ones, the more accurate and simple ones to explain. It's a rather long blog post looking at various aspects of the original series of Star Trek, the current one with Discovery and Picard, and Return to Strange New Worlds, which is hopefully a return to form of the original Star Trek. And the main thrust of this post is the concept of the optimistic philosophy. Now, generally, you would think of a story or a TV show having a certain tone, meaning it feels optimistic or it looks optimistic. Now, that's just based off a narrative. So the narrative could change, the tone could change as you go, but it then becomes the overall feel of the show. What's the feeling of the sets, the feeling of the characters, the dress, the sound, the music, is the world in a certain state. So even though it's episodic, most Star Trek is episodic, you can change the tone, you can change the narrative any way you like. So what's happening in the newer Trek, or nuTrek, or Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard, is you have a very bleak future. You have a very grim, scary, violent, dark future, or at least setting, and everyone's in it, and it's all very explosive and all very bombastic and space opera-like. And that's not exactly the kind of tone or the kind of philosophy that Star Trek originally was all about. This regards to Gene Roddenberry's view of the future, how we all get along. Technology solves most of our problems. And that's a fine idea to start with. The beautiful thing about that is, regardless of this futuristic world where everyone is better off, you can still have dark stories. And Screen Rant also did a series of that. So here's the top 15 darkest episodes of Star Trek. And it's from all the series at the time. And most of these are from DS9 just because that's the nature of DS9. It was about war and religion and a bunch of other things. Duet's very famous. This is one of my favorites, In the Pale Moonlight. This is basically a Stardate record of Sisko talking about what he did to achieve his goals and some of the ethical quandaries he had to go through. The Drumhead, a very well-known TNG episode. Another well-known TNG episode, Chain of Command. A few good quotes from there. I don't remember the Siege of AR-558. Again, it's all about war. Of course, Oblivion was very strange, where it's essentially a story of a bunch of replicated... Well, actually, the entire ship is replicated of Voyager, and they're realizing that they're all fake. They're not real. Even the ship is falling apart. So everything about this show is everyone realizing their demise is coming. So Voyager also jumped around with tone as well. But the overall feeling was still that of optimism. We're going to get home. This is a thing we're trying to do. There's a major plot we're focusing on, which was one thing that Voyager had going for it from the start, even though it might have been hit and miss in the episodic storytelling department. So that's generally what Discovery and Picard has lost. And with that came a loss of lore, as we see the setting, let's say in Discovery, is much darker and grittier, which made us to believe, actually I believe Red Letter Media talked about, that maybe this is all in the mirror universe that we were introduced to in the original series. That everyone's just the opposite. And that would explain a heck of a lot more. But then they introduced the mirror universe anyway, and then it's even more dark. So it's kind of getting at too much action, adventure, violent, dark stories in our Star Trek, which should be a little bit more optimistic, a little bit more nicer, having us appeal to our better natures. So I like how the author is saying it's sort of forgotten what Star Trek was all about. Yes, Star Trek is a giant series of stories, of books, of magazines, not magazines, more of comic books. It's a whole bunch of things. But it's generally an optimistic view of the future. And modern Trek has sort of lost that. I haven't watched much of Discovery, but you could tell just from the setting, the lighting, the music, the camera angles, the characters, the personalities, everything's a little broken. Everything's dark and not as inviting as the clean or the brightness of the sets of of Star Trek: The Next Generation, even of DS9, which was pretty gritty. Even that was brighter. So maybe Strange New Worlds will return to form. Maybe we'll have a much more optimistic view of the future, at least of the Star Trek world. I don't think it's going to happen, though. If you have exactly the same producers and directors and even the same actors, I don't think it's going to happen. It's possible, but maybe they've listened to feedback. Maybe they're course correcting and having an actual episode or a series that are more optimistic, more science fiction based, as opposed to being grim dark and violent and people dying and all these other things that happen. But I don't know. I haven't been watching these shows. I think Picard was a huge letdown, and that was the second major production from the Kurtzman view of Star Trek. We could be let down the garden path. It sounds promising, but we don't know. This is also an interesting article of restarting the DS9 Cisco feud. That would have been fantastic plotline for Picard in comparison to what we were given. Anything to have conflict on an interpersonal level without having to blow up planets and people, I think is a great idea for Picard. But sadly, I don't think we're going to get too many psychological conflicts or a focus of psychological conflicts in the Star Trek Picard series. I don't think Discovery is going to be any better. And I just hope that New Worlds goes back to its original callings of what Star Trek was all about. But hey, maybe you guys have some better insight into Star Trek. I'm certainly not into it these days. If you do have any insight or know what's cool in the Star Trek world, please write them down in the comments below. I'd love to hear them. Thanks for listening. Have yourself a great day.